Morning sunlight filtered through the curtains and a lingering headache pulled me from bed. I stumbled to the bathroom, downing 2 aspirin and gripping the sink, hoping my unsettled stomach would calm. My name is Ron Jameson, and yesterday threw my life into turmoil. After a long workday, I came home unaware of the emotional wreckage awaiting me. Chrissy, my wife, looked at me with a blend of sadness and affection. She confessed to being involved with another man for the past year. She explained that this man, devastated by a car accident that took his wife's life while he walked away unharmed, saw Chrissy as his lifeline. Chrissy shared how she'd tried to mend his broken spirit, how their bond grew into love and eventually became physical. She insisted her feelings for me hadn't changed and promised to return fully once he no longer needed her. She vowed to stay involved with our kids and me, juggling her time between our family and this man whom she believed would ultimately move on. Her confession felt like a punch to the gut. Stunned, I lashed out, calling her names in a futile effort to process the betrayal. Chrissy fired back, accusing me of failing to truly love and support her, throwing our wedding vows back at me. She argued that if I loved her, I would accept this arrangement, painful as it was. The conversation left me wrestling with a storm of emotions, questioning everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and marriage. Chrissy was clearly frustrated and disappointed, while I was filled with rage. Trying to avoid hitting something, I turned to drinking and shouting. After calming down a little, I asked her how she'd feel if I found someone else. "Who would want you?" she sneered. "You're a middle-aged man, overweight, with thinning hair." She warned that if I tried to divorce her, she'd destroy me. I was furious and completely at a loss for what to do, my mind spiraling in confusion. I continued drinking and raging at her until finally Chrissy packed a bag. "I'm going to my lover's until you calm down and accept things as they are," she said. I barely remember what happened after that. Sitting on our bed, I decided to take stock. Chrissy was right. I was middle-aged, losing my hair, and about 20 pounds overweight. I couldn't change my age, but I could work on my weight and hair. My first priority was finding out where my kids were. It was Saturday morning, so they should have been home. After searching the house, I realized they weren't there. Where had Chrissy taken them? I was about to call her parents when I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was Chrissy's car, and I saw her kids getting out. I met Chrissy at the door. "Good, you're sober," she said sharply. "Where were the kids?" I asked. "They were with me." "I couldn't leave them with you in that state." "You didn't take them to your lover's, did you?" I hissed. "Watch your tone, Ron," she snapped. "They were there. My friend is kind, unlike you. I wouldn't leave them with you the way you were yesterday." "Fair enough," I admitted, "but why not take them to your parents' place?" "They weren't home," she said, heading upstairs. I followed. "So are you staying here or going back to your lover?" "Oh, Ron, stop being childish," she said, exasperated. "I've told you how things will be. The discussion is over: accept it or don't. Even though you're acting like a fool, I still love you. When he no longer needs me, I'll be back full time." "So what now?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "For now, I'm packing a few things to stay with my friend until you cool down and accept this." "What about the kids?" I tried to shame her into staying, but it didn't work. "If you don't want to watch them, call my parents. They'll take them," she replied, packing another bag before leaving. My head was ready to explode, but I knew I had to keep it together for the kids. I wouldn't let her affair break me. No self-respecting man would. After she left, I checked on the kids and asked if they had any homework. They groaned but agreed to get started when I promised we'd visit their grandparents afterward. They loved going there, especially since Pop was helping them build go-karts. Chrissy's parents, Sam and Mary, lived on a small nearby farm. Sam, a retired handyman, had a big workshop where they worked on the go-karts together. Sometimes I helped too, as a certified mechanic at the local Ford dealership. I wanted to talk with Chrissy's parents to see if they knew about her lover and maybe get their advice. I'd always had a strong relationship with them and considered them surrogate parents, since mine lived far away. But I worried they might side with Chrissy. As I checked on the kids working on their homework, it struck me how much they meant to me. Ron, the oldest at 16, played football but wasn't likely to get a college scholarship. Sally, 15, was a typical teenager and a good student. Kyle, our youngest at 11, was an unexpected blessing and a cheerful kid. While they worked, I made coffee and began a list of things I needed to handle. First, I called my boss, Bob Clarkson, to explain the situation. I'd worked at the dealership since it opened 23 years ago, and Bob had been my boss for the past 15. He was understanding, having seen his son go through a messy divorce, filled with false accusations. "Damn," I said. "She's one cold woman." "Tell me about it," Bob replied bitterly. "For a week we thought the police would arrest Gary. These accusations are brutal and hard to disprove. Police get jumpy whenever a woman accuses a man. The only thing that saved Gary was his ex-mother-in-law," he continued. "When Carol told her mom that Gary was mistreating her granddaughter, she thought it would ruin him. Bev, known for her ruthless fairness, took her granddaughter to the doctor to check for abuse. The doctor confirmed there was no mistreatment. Bev went to the police and warned she'd testify against her daughter if they pursued charges. She also threatened to reveal Carol's issues with pills, which would lead to losing custody. God bless Bev," I said, shocked at how far some would go to get their way. "Amen to that," Bob agreed. "If there's anything I can do to help, just let me know. If it's within my power, I'll make it happen." I asked for the next week off, using my personal days and vacation time. Bob agreed and offered more time if needed. "There's one more thing," I said. "I need a good divorce lawyer." "That's easy," Bob replied. "Use the attorney my son hired. He tore Carol's case apart. Gary got primary custody, kept the house, and Carol even has to pay child support. His name is Dwight Tucker. I think I still have his number. The messier my son's divorce got. The more I heard Tucker's name echo in my sleep," Bob said, finding Dwight Tucker's business card after a quick search. I called Tucker's office, not expecting an answer on a Saturday, but luck was on my side. Not only was Mr. Tucker in, but his secretary informed me he'd had a cancellation and could see me if I arrived in 30 minutes. I told the kids I'd be gone for about an hour and to behave, then made it to Tucker's office in 20 minutes. Dwight Tucker, a sharp-looking man in his mid-30s with piercing blue eyes and a friendly smile, greeted me. I could see why he'd appealed to lady jurors. "What can I do for you today?" he asked as I sat down. "My wife told me yesterday she's been having an affair with a younger man," I replied, feeling both humiliated and furious. I recounted the events of the previous day, and as I spoke, Dwight took notes. When I explained that my wife claimed to still love me but intended to continue seeing this man, he paused.
"Let me get this straight," he said, his expression darkening. "Your wife says she loves you but plans to keep seeing this guy."
Feeling ashamed, I nodded. "Go on," Dwight encouraged. I explained how Chrissy became angry when I refused to accept her plan, admitting I'd called her some harsh names. I painfully recalled how she laughed when I asked how she'd feel if I found another woman. She belittled me, saying no woman would want me and threatened to ruin me if I pursued divorce. She actually said that Dwight asked, incredulous, "No offense, Mr. Fremont, but your wife is either incredibly heartless or has some deep mental issues." None taken, I sighed. I think the same. I then told him how Chrissy had left the kids at her lover's house during our argument, where they'd spent the night. Dwight's head snapped up, and he grinned as he jotted down a note. "Now for the $64,000 question, what do you want to do?" Dwight asked, steepling his fingers. "I can't live like this," I replied after a pause. "I don't know if I'll ever get over it, but I also don't want to get crushed in a divorce or lose my kids." Dwight nodded with understanding. "That's common when women face divorce due to their own bad behavior, but I'll work hard to protect you and limit any damage she can do. You'll get at least 50% of the joint assets. However, the courts generally don't care about infidelity, so you may still have to pay alimony and child support." Despite his assurances, I felt defeated. "Yes, it's possible, but that's why we need to move quickly," Dwight said, scanning his notes. "Your wife has left the marital home and allowed your children to stay at her lover's place, which doesn't look good in court. Right now you have custody, and we can try to maintain it. I'll file for an emergency restraining order against your wife, which will allow you to stay in the house temporarily. The longer you stay, the stronger your case for primary custody becomes." Does your wife work? Yes, part-time at the hospital on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I replied, adding, that's likely where she met this guy. Dwight nodded and asked about her income. About $25,000 a year, while I make around $80,000, I replied. I have to ask a tough question, and I want you to think carefully, Dwight said, looking directly at me. Do you still love her? Do you want to try working things out? I looked down at the floor for a long time. When I finally raised my head, tears were streaming down my face. I do love her, but I can't live with this arrangement. She's demeaned me and broken her vows. I just want a divorce. Last question, Dwight said, turning to a fresh sheet of paper. Tell me about your assets. I quickly reviewed our finances. We have about $3,500 in checking, $44,000 in savings, and a $20,000 CD. I have approximately $150,000 in my 401k, while Chrissy has slightly less in her retirement account from her full-time position at the hospital, despite generally better benefits at her job. My company offers a superior healthcare plan, which we use. We also have 2 cars in both our names and a house with minimal equity, as we took out a large loan to purchase it a few years back. Here's what I want you to do, Dwight said, looking ready for a fight. Withdraw half of the savings, checking, and CD balances and place it in a new account under your name only. I can't access the CD without Chrissy's signature, I explained. No problem, Dwight replied, calculating. Withdraw $33,750 from savings. Pay as many household bills as possible from the checking account. Cancel your joint credit cards and get one in your name only. I still have a credit card from before we got married, I said. I rarely use it because our joint card has cashback rewards. Even better, Dwight smiled. You won't need a new card. He wrote a list of instructions and handed it to me. Go to my secretary and have her contact Taylor Locksmith to change your locks. Then come back and we'll go over the next steps. MS. Carlson promptly called the locksmith and they said they could arrive around noon. I returned to Dwight's office as he wrapped up a call. We're in luck, he said. If I submit the paperwork today, we'll get Judge Johnson. Why is that lucky? I asked. He despises cheaters, Dwight grinned. An old-fashioned Bible Belt judge who doesn't tolerate infidelity. If he wasn't available, this would be harder. Judge Johnson is also a friend of my father's, so he won't mind if I call him at home. Dwight stood and offered his hand, which I shook gratefully. Before you head home. Dwight advised, take care of your banking. I'm preparing a petition for an emergency restraining order against your wife, which would bar her from the house and keep her at least 500 feet from you and the kids. The fact that she stayed with her lover and left your kids there should help us get it. The order might be reversed later, but by then you'll have established yourself as the primary caregiver. By Friday, I'll have divorce papers ready to serve her, and then we'll see how she reacts. For the first time since Chrissy's confession, I felt like I was taking control. The bank wasn't busy, so I quickly obtained a cashier's check for my share of the funds and paid off the $537 balance on our joint credit card from the checking account. I also paid the mortgage 2 months in advance, which used up another $2,600. With the cashier's check in hand, I went to a different bank and opened new accounts solely in my name. When I returned home, the kids were watching TV, so I loaded them into the car and drove to their grandparents'. Sam waved from his workshop as the kids ran to him, and Mary greeted me with a hug. A minute later, Sam joined us. I have something difficult to share, I began. Chrissy is having an affair, and I'm filing for divorce. I don't believe it, Sam said sharply. What proof do you have? She told me, I replied softly, tears slipping down my face. Just then the kids walked in. Please wait outside for a few minutes, I told them.
Why, Dad, my eldest, Ron asked.
Because I said so, I replied more sternly than I intended. Ron noticed my tears and quickly ushered his siblings back out. She told you, Mary asked, disbelief clear in her voice. Yes, I replied firmly. I recounted the events of the previous night, including Chrissy's insults and threats. Both Sam and Mary were visibly shocked, and Sam grew angrier by the second. I still don't believe it, he muttered. I'm calling her and putting it on speaker. Sam dialed Chrissy's number and placed the phone on the coffee table. "Hey, Daddy," Chrissy answered brightly. "What can I do for you?" "Ron's here," Sam said flatly. "Are you having an affair?" There was a long silence before Chrissy demanded, "What did he say?" "He said you're having relations with another man and that you love him." "It's complicated, Daddy," she pleaded. "I'm helping someone who's been through a terrible tragedy." Sam's face turned red. "Are you having relations with him or not?" "Yes, we've been together, but I still love Ron. I can't just abandon this man. I love him too." I was floored. Chrissy had always been a daddy's girl, and I had expected Sam to defend her. "Chrissy," Sam's voice was strained. "I never thought my daughter would turn into ... this." "Daddy, please," Chrissy begged, but Sam ended the call abruptly. Moments later, the phone rang again. Mary moved to answer, but Sam snatched it from her hand and hurled it at the fireplace. "I said leave it alone," he yelled, his anger shocking Mary, who backed away. I was equally stunned. Silence filled the room as Sam and Mary absorbed the news. Finally, Sam hugged me tightly. "Ron, I'm so sorry. I can't believe our daughter did this to you. We'll help in any way we can. Mary will talk to her later, but right now I'm too furious to speak with her." I had to leave to meet the locksmith, so after getting the kids into the car, I hugged Sam and Mary, inviting them for dinner to talk more. On the way home, Sally started crying. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" she sobbed. "Where'd you hear that?" I asked. "From me," Ron Jr. said defiantly. I snuck back in and listened. I sighed, realizing they deserved some truth, though I wished I could shield them from it. Chrissy had given no thought to the impact on our children. "Yes, it looks like we will," I said softly. "But why?" Kyle asked, his voice small. "Your mother has fallen in love with someone else," I explained. "You mean she's been with another man?" Sally asked through her tears. "I hate her. She's a complete witch." "Sally, don't say that about your mother," I said, though I felt similarly. The locks were changed just in time. 10 minutes later, Chrissy's car came roaring into the driveway. "You told my parents, didn't you?" she screamed as she got out. "I'm sure you called me all sorts of names." "I thought you loved me, Chrissy," I said sadly. "I loved you deeply, but I can't accept you being with someone else. You hurt me terribly when you called me an unattractive, middle-aged man no one else would want. Your pity love I don't need. You also threatened to ruin me. How can you claim to love me if you truly think what you're doing is right? It should matter that your parents know." Chrissy's expression wavered, then hardened. "Fine, I'm sorry. I didn't mean those things. I was angry because you insulted me." "You vowed to love, honor, and cherish me, Chrissy," I said. "If you loved me, you'd accept what we have. I'm not leaving you for him. I love him too and want to help him. He's younger and will eventually move on." "Chrissy," I replied, shaking my head, "if you're going to quote vows, remember you also promised to forsake all others. A married woman doesn't just share herself with another man, no matter how much he's hurting. I've accepted that you're not the person I thought you were, and I don't want you in my life. Take it or leave it." Chrissy's face turned red as she glared at me, her breathing quickening as she struggled to come up with a retort. At that moment, I wished I didn't still love her, but a part of me did. "Ron," she said in a tone she reserved for the kids, "stop being foolish. I'm your wife. I love you and will return to you once he's better." I was heartbroken, but my love had turned into a cold hatred. "No, Chrissy, I don't know who you are anymore. My wife was loving and loyal. You? I don't recognize you. For all I know, this is just one of many affairs. I can't trust you." Chrissy's face flushed with anger. "This is not an affair. He's the only one since we married, and he needs me. Whether you agree or not, I'm going to help him." "Fine, do whatever you want, but I don't trust you. And I'll be getting a DNA test to confirm the kids are mine." "You're a total jerk," she spat. "This is going to get ugly. Remember what I said would happen if you tried to divorce me." "I'd rather live in poverty than with someone who has no morals," I replied coldly. She seemed oblivious to the consequences coming her way. Just then, a sheriff's vehicle pulled up and a deputy approached. "Are you Chrissy Jameson?" he asked. "Yes," Chrissy responded, confused. "Ma, I am. This is a restraining order. You are barred from entering the house and must stay at least 500 feet away. Do you understand?" "But that's my home," she sputtered. "All my things are inside." "You have 15 minutes to collect your belongings," the deputy stated firmly. I nodded in agreement. "I'll take the kids to the backyard." "I want to see my children," Chrissy said, her tone frantic. "Ma, am," the deputy interjected. "The restraining order is to protect your children from you." Chrissy's face contorted with fury as she turned to me. "You did this, you're taking my children away." "No, Chrissy, you did this," I replied calmly. "You left the house and left our children at your lover's place." "I didn't abandon our home, and he's a good man," she screamed. "I'm helping him by being with him." "If he's so wonderful, go live with him and give him your love. Or is he just using you?" I retorted, making sure the deputy could hear every word. I took the kids to the backyard, explaining that their mother was gathering some belongings to take to her friends. I promised to let them say goodbye before she left. When we returned to the front yard, Kyle ran into his mother's arms, sobbing and begging her not to leave. "Please, Ron," Chrissy sobbed. "Can't you see what this is doing to the kids?" My anger flared, but I kept it under control. "Don't bring the kids into this. I haven't done anything to them. You took them to your lover's house while you were with him." "Ron, I can't abandon him," Chrissy cried. "Chrissy, you already abandoned your husband, your kids, and your home. Now it's time for us to do the same with you. You didn't consider the consequences, and now you're facing them." Ron Jr. looked at her, his expression a mix of sadness and betrayal. "Why?" he asked quietly. Chrissy tried to explain to him, but it was clear he wasn't convinced. Sally, however, had no sympathy. "You're just a selfish witch," she spat, and before I could stop her, she spat at Chrissy's face, her anger fierce. I had to pull Sally back before she tried to hit her mother, demanding that she apologize, but she flatly refused. Chrissy was taken by surprise, collapsing in tears. Recently, tensions had been rising between her and Sally, which I had assumed was typical teenage defiance, but now I worried Chrissy might have caused permanent harm to their relationship. While I held Sally, Chrissy stood up, dashed to her car, and drove off, angrily hitting the steering wheel. Kyle chased after her, crying, "Mommy, please don't go." Ron Jr. stopped him and led him back. The deputy looked at me sympathetically, saying, "Mr. Jameson, I'm truly sorry for what you're going through." Later that night, Sam and Mary joined us for dinner. I had planned to grill burgers, but Mary took over the kitchen, preparing meatloaf and her well-loved macaroni and cheese, a favorite with the kids. While Mary cooked, Sam and I shared a few beers in the living room. He seemed deeply troubled by his daughter's actions. I explained the restraining order and how Chrissy had left the children alone at her lover's residence, which only deepened Sam's sadness. "Mary spoke to Chrissy about an hour after you left," Sam finally said. "How did it go?" I asked. "Terrible," Sam admitted. "Mary tried reasoning with Chrissy, but she's convinced that she's right and everyone else is wrong. She thinks we're awful people." Mary, frustrated, told Chrissy to stop contacting us and warned that she would testify against her if it reached court. As you can imagine, dinner was somber. The only bright spot was Sam inviting the kids to work on their go-karts the following day, which made Ron Jr. and Kyle smile. Sally, however, sat sullenly and didn't eat. I understood she was hurting as much as I was. On Friday, Chrissy was served divorce papers at the hospital. Friends there informed me that she lost control, cursing the process server and threatening to ruin me. She was sent home, or rather to her lover's residence. Chrissy hired Amber Wright, a lawyer Dwight knew, who wasn't as skilled as she thought. Amber attempted to revoke the restraining order, but Judge Johnson only modified it, allowing Chrissy supervised visits at the house without her boyfriend present, with a warning that any breach would end her visitation rights. Initially, Chrissy seemed pleased, but her enthusiasm dimmed when the judge ordered her to pay child support, requiring her to resume a full-time work. Despite her outburst at the hospital, it was likely they would reinstate her due to her skills and the nursing shortage. After the hearing, I received the DNA results. It took me half a day to gather the courage to open the envelope. When I did, I felt immense relief. My kids were truly mine. I reread the report multiple times for reassurance. I realized that no matter the outcome, I would have loved my kids regardless. Even if Chrissy abandoned her lover and returned, I could never forgive her. Her influence was toxic, and she needed to be kept away from the children. I used all my personal and vacation days to be with the kids, and once those were exhausted, Chrissy's parents helped. Sam and Mary refused to speak to Chrissy until she regained her senses. After numerous daily calls over a week, Sam blocked her number. The visitation schedule was left for Chrissy and me to determine, meaning our attorneys relayed our preferences. We agreed Chrissy could visit on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays between 6 and 7 p.m. Mary offered to supervise, but I insisted on being present for the first visit to establish clear boundaries. On the first Monday, Chrissy arrived in a car I didn't recognize, likely her lover's. She walked up to the house cautiously, giving a tentative smile. "Hello, Ron, how are you?" "Mom, it's good to see you," she greeted us. "Chrissy, you need to leave," I stated firmly. "The judge said your lover can't be within 500 feet of this house." Shock spread across her face. "But he just dropped me off," she protested. "Are you out of your mind?" I was furious. The judge was clear, no lover here. Tell him to leave now, and I won't inform the judge. Chrissy quickly nodded and returned to the car. I stepped outside, noted the license plate, and returned to the porch as the car drove away. "He'll pick me up later," she said defiantly. "Have him wait down the street. I don't want him near the house." Chrissy's face showed anger. "Ron, I'm sick of your treatment. You didn't need to take money from our account or cancel my credit card." I replied I didn't take anything. The money was used to pay off the card and covered 2 mortgage payments. I wanted to make sure the kids had a stable place to live while we sorted this out. As for the credit card, I wasn't going to be stuck paying for anything you charged with your lover. Chrissy flushed with anger, her voice sharp. "This isn't an affair, and he's not my lover." "You're being unreasonable." Before I could reply, Mary stepped forward and slapped Chrissy across the face. Both of us were shocked. Mary glared, saying, "If you ever disrespect Ron again, I'll tear that dress off and spank you red. If you want to see the kids, wait in the living room. I'll talk to Ron first, and then I'll join you. If you misbehave, I'll throw you out." Chrissy, humbled, nodded and went inside. Mary turned to me saying, "Ron, I'm sorry for my thoughtless daughter. Thanks for standing up for me." I replied with gratitude, then left. 2 weeks later, the restraining order was lifted, as Dwight had anticipated. By then, I was designated as the primary caregiver and allowed to remain in the house. Chrissy continued seeing her lover, so her child support obligations remained. She could have unsupervised visits with the kids in public spaces, but wasn't permitted to bring them to her lover's home or have him present. After months of delays, our initial court date to finalize the divorce arrived. Before the attorneys began, Judge Johnson asked if we had attended counseling. The attorneys admitted we hadn't, so the judge mandated 8 sessions of marital counseling. Neither Chrissy nor I objected. I thought they'd be pointless, but didn't want to irritate the judge. Chrissy seemed to think she could persuade me or the therapist that her actions were justified. The first session with therapist Ann Patterson went as expected. Chrissy spent most of the time explaining that her behavior was in line with Christian values. Ann appeared stunned by Chrissy's arrogance. In the second week, Ann gently questioned Chrissy's reasoning, asking if it would be fair if I pursued a relationship with another woman. I winced, anticipating an insult, but none came. Chrissy didn't answer immediately, and I no longer cared. During the lengthy divorce, I made some changes. When the woman you love says you're inadequate, you feel compelled to prove her wrong. I underwent hair transplant surgery, which cost about $4,000. Although I hesitated, fearing ridicule, I went through with it since I was still on leave. My hair was shaved and follicles from the back were implanted in the front. I stayed home for a week, telling the kids it was a minor medical procedure. After 10 days, I looked like my old self again, with my hair growing a little more each week. Once I had fully healed, I began exercising and running. Initially, I could only manage a half mile, but eventually I was able to reach 10 miles. I joined a gym and switched our meals to healthier choices. The kids weren't thrilled at first, missing their fast food, cookies, ice cream, and pizza. I found fun, healthy recipes online, and while some attempts didn't turn out well, we laughed, threw them out, and made sandwiches instead. Cooking together became a family activity. Despite the pain caused by Chrissy's betrayal, I was starting to feel better about myself. On my first day back at work, I got an unexpected confidence boost. Trudy, the receptionist, gave me a curious look but didn't comment on my new hairstyle. "Welcome back, Ron," she chirped, then began studying me. "There's something different about you," blushing slightly, I responded. "Oh, I've been dieting. Lost 18 pounds so far and aiming to drop 5 more." She laughed and nodded. "Well, it suits you. If I weren't married, I'd be all over you." "Grateful for the compliment," I replied. "Thanks for the boost, but my wife seems to think I'm just a middle-aged man with no attraction. So much so that she's found someone else." I tried to joke, but it fell flat. Everyone at the company was already aware of my situation. Trudy's expression darkened and she said, "Chrissy must be crazy or not thinking straight. You're a great guy, Ron. Plenty of women would love to be with you, so don't let her mess with your head." It was the best encouragement I'd received in months, and I no longer felt like such a failure. I was brought back to reality when Ann asked, "Chrissy, how would you feel if Ron came home and said he was involved with another woman?" Although I braced for Chrissy to insult me, she didn't. She glanced at me, and I think it dawned on her that she could no longer accuse me of being out of shape or balding, which boosted my confidence even more. I just sat back and waited as she thought of what to say. She couldn't very well argue that I shouldn't be with someone else if she was with another man. Finally, with a smug tone, she said, if he was helping her through some hardship, I'd be okay with it. Ann followed up, "What if he told you he loved her and that they shared a close physical relationship?" Chrissy replied, "I would accept it, as long as he assured me that the kids and I were cared for." The session continued with Ann challenging Chrissy to see the flaws in her logic, but Chrissy refused to yield. I worried these sessions were just a way for Chrissy to try to convince me she was right, which wasn't going to happen. The shock of her actions had started to wear off. Love is a strange thing. If it's not nurtured, it fades. By the third week, something had changed. Chrissy came to the session quieter and didn't say much, mainly listening. It seemed she was less confident now, possibly because Ann had been gently challenging her arguments at every step. I also noticed Chrissy sneaking glances at me when she thought I wasn't looking. I had kept working out and shed a few more pounds, and yard work had given me a nice tan. A couple of months before these therapy sessions started, I decided to make a change. I was growing dissatisfied with my job, though I loved fixing cars, not just engines, but also bodywork. Since I was 14, I'd been restoring old cars and could now handle all aspects of it. I saw opening my own business as a way to spend more time with my kids. I discussed it with Sam, and he agreed to help me. I wanted to set up a shop and start my own business, but quitting my job outright wasn't feasible, as I lacked the funds to support us while the business took off. We would struggle financially before it became profitable. Since Sam's farm was in an industrial area, he offered me space in his workshop to get started. The workshop had once been a horse barn that Sam had converted, offering ample space for both of us. If the business took off, Sam agreed to lease me a piece of land along the road to build my own place. I spent time at my current job observing how things were organized. The dealership was structured for high volume, and although they did some body work, much of it was outsourced. With this in mind, I scaled down my equipment needs. One essential piece would be a paint booth, and Sam not only supported the idea but also helped me build it. I invested the money I'd taken from our joint account, along with a small loan from Sam, to fund this venture. I started part-time, mostly on weekends and evenings. It was enjoyable, and the kids often came out to watch or even lend a hand. I loved teaching Ron Jr. skills, and even Sally got involved, proudly telling her friends about helping change an engine or paint a car, which earned her respect from the boys at school. Word of mouth brought in business, and soon I wondered if I should make this my full-time job. The decision became urgent when my employer requested me to work over the weekend to clear some backlog, but I had customers of my own to look after. I expected to get fired when I told Bob I couldn't work due to my own business commitments. "Got a minute, Bob?" I asked, peeking into his office. "Sure, Ron," he replied, waving me in. "Glad you're working this weekend. We have 44 cars coming in on Friday that need thorough checks and prep work by the month's end." I winced slightly. Most people don't realize that factories offer incentives to dealerships if they sell a certain number of cars in a month. For instance, they might say, if you sell 300 vehicles, we'll take $150 off each car's cost, amounting to a $4,500 savings. But if they only sell 299, they get nothing important for the dealership's bottom line. "That's the thing, Bob," I said, feeling sweat run down my back. "I can't work this weekend." I've started a small business on weekends and I have clients I need to serve. I'm sorry, Ron, Bob said curtly. If you can't work this weekend, I may have to let you go. I understand, Bob, I replied with resignation, and I hope there are no hard feelings. I'm trying to build something to spend more time with my kids and save for their college. I'll clear out my locker. Bob sighed. I'd hate to lose you, Ron. Tell me about this business. Where's it located and what kind of work are you doing? I explained that I had set up my operation on my father-in-law's land and detailed the equipment I had. I was equipped to handle nearly any car repair, including bodywork. Go grab yourself a coffee and then come back here, Bob said as he picked up his phone. I didn't want coffee, so I went to my locker and put my things in a box. Losing this job was going to make things difficult. For a while, we'd have to put the kids on Chrissy's health insurance since I'd already taken her off mine. Even so, I was sure I could handle it. I was almost turning down as much work as I was bringing in. As I walked down the hallway, Bob gestured for me to come into his office. I've got a proposal for you, Ron, he said eagerly. If you work this weekend, we'll cover any losses you face if your clients are upset. I shook my head. No, I replied. I can't do that to my clients. Hold on, I'm not finished, Bob said, sliding a document across the desk. It was an independent contractor's agreement. I really need your help this weekend. I also think you can persuade your clients to wait a few days. If you manage that and your shop passes our inspection, we'll bring you on as an independent contractor for some of our bodywork. I was shocked but agreed to the arrangement. After that weekend, I was essentially running my business full-time. Occasionally, I'd stop by the dealership if there was an issue and I wasn't too busy. Sam started helping me part-time and Mary took on my bookkeeping. I was now earning more than I ever had while working for the dealership. The only part of my life that remained unresolved was my marriage. After the 4th counseling session, I was ready to quit them altogether. I didn't really care what Chrissy did with her new partner anymore. Sure, it still hurt to think of her with someone else, but I wasn't as bothered by it as I used to be. In our 5th session, I decided to go on the offensive. I figured that if I confronted Chrissy with enough force, she might decide to end these pointless meetings. When Ann asked if I had anything to say, I turned to Chrissy. Chrissy, I've come to the conclusion that you're not only selfish but incredibly cruel, I said. How could you tell the man you supposedly love that he's too unattractive for any other woman to want? You wounded me in a way I don't think I'll ever fully recover from. Oh, Ron, I'm so sorry, she cried. I'm so ashamed I ever said that. If I could take it back, I would. I do love you, just not enough to leave him keep your apologies, I replied sharply. You'll need them more than I do. Chrissy broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Despite Ann's and my attempts, we couldn't calm her down. Eventually, Ann ended the session but gave us some exercises to complete before the next one. I wasn't looking forward to it, thinking the sessions were a waste of time. The exercises included questions about our relationship with our parents and our intimacy. Some questions seemed unrelated, like my favorite food or what kind of car I drove. But one question really made me pause. It asked if there was one thing I could change, what would it be? I started on the worksheet after our last session, but I set it aside when I got to that question, wanting time to reflect. The next day, I finally wrote down that I wished I had been a better husband so that my wife wouldn't have fallen out of love with me. At the following session, we handed in our responses, but Ann didn't look at them. Instead, she asked if we had any questions or topics we wanted to discuss. I have a question for Chrissy, I said immediately. Ann nodded, and I faced my estranged wife. Chrissy, I don't think we're making any progress with these sessions. You've made it clear that you're not going to leave Bruce Hartman, so there's no chance for reconciliation. Why don't we just stop and move forward with the divorce? How do you know his name? Chrissy asked, shocked. The first time you came by to see the kids, I took down his license plate number. From there, it wasn't hard to learn his name. But it doesn't matter. I have no interest in retaliating or even talking to him. I just want to move on. Chrissy looked at me with the saddest expression I'd ever seen. Part of me wanted to hug her and comfort her, but I knew it wouldn't solve anything. I know your lawyer hasn't been pleased with the settlement I've offered so far. I've asked my attorney to propose some alternatives. I'm willing to increase your visitation with the kids and pay you $1,000 a month in alimony for 3 years. I just want this to be over, no matter the cost. I watched her, searching for any reaction, but all I saw was sadness. She'd made it clear that she wasn't going to end things with him, and I couldn't, nor would I, accept my wife being with someone else. I couldn't understand how she thought I would tolerate it, but at this point it didn't matter. I just wanted out. I pushed forward. I know that some of the things you said about me were partially true. Yes, it hurt deeply, and I didn't think I'd ever get over it. But as time passes, I realize I am moving past it, as you can see. I've tried to take better care of myself. I don't think I'm the man you thought so little of when you got involved with Bruce. I've even started dating. After we're divorced, you can be with him for as long as you want, but I think it's time we end this, so you can focus on rebuilding a relationship with the kids. With that, Chrissy burst into tears and left the room. Anne looked as surprised as I felt. After collecting herself, Anne suggested that Chrissy come alone for the next session and that I have the final session by myself. I agreed with a sigh. When Chrissy initially told me about her affair, I was angry and filled with hatred. But months later, I was simply exhausted. I could see the toll this situation was taking on everyone, me, Chrissy, her family, and most importantly, our children. I wanted it to stop. I was no longer consumed with rage over her relationship with someone else. When I arrived for my final session with Anne, I felt relieved not just because Chrissy wasn't there, but because this marked the end of our counseling sessions. Ron, I want to commend you for the self-control you've shown throughout these meetings, Anne began. I realize how deeply painful this entire situation has been for you. After my meeting with Chrissy last week, I believe I finally understand what led to your wife's actions. I leaned forward in my chair, hoping to finally learn why Chrissy chose to ruin our marriage. Do you remember the assignment I gave you, she asked. I nodded, though I'd nearly forgotten it, assuming it hadn't added much to the sessions. Your responses to one particular question surprised me, Anne said, pulling out 2 sheets of paper from her folder. The question was, if you could change one thing, what would it be? Do you recall? I nodded again. You answered that you wished you could have been a better husband so your wife wouldn't have stopped loving you. When Chrissy heard that, she broke down, crying harder than ever, and it took me quite a while to calm her. I didn't know how to respond, so I just sat there silent. Ron, your wife never stopped loving you. Oh, sure, I said with sarcasm. That's why she's still with Bruce, because of all that love she has for me. Anne gave me a disappointed look before she sighed. Ron, what I found out about Chrissy is that she's been experiencing a severe midlife crisis. As the kids grew up, she felt her life slipping away. She's always been, and likely always will be, a warm and caring person. Then Bruce came along, needing her desperately. She confused her desire to feel young again and his overwhelming guilt over his wife's death with love. That changes nothing, I argued. She's still with Bruce, actually. She's not, Ron, Anne replied. I was stunned. Why didn't Chrissy tell me? Anne sighed again. I know this probably won't change how you feel at this point, but you need to know the truth. Bruce left town the same day you told Chrissy you were dating and moving forward with the divorce. She thought she had already lost you. I considered it, but Anne was right. It didn't change my feelings. Too much had happened to go back. My life was on track now, and I wanted to keep moving forward. I could never trust Chrissy again, nor did I want to live that way. Most of all, I wanted the kids to reconnect with their mother. Sally's grades had dropped significantly since this all began, and she was still angry with her mom. Kyle had become withdrawn, moody, and had started acting out at school, perhaps the worst consequence of Chrissy's actions. Kyle wasn't the cheerful kid he used to be. Ron Jr. handled it best. He wasn't angry or distant, but he changed the subject any time his mother came up. Maybe his reaction was worse than the others, but I couldn't be sure. One last thing, Ron, Anne said, handing me a second paper. Here's Chrissy's answer to that same question. She wrote that if she could change one thing, it would be that she never met Bruce Hartman. The divorce went through, and Chrissy was scheduled to see the kids on Wednesdays and Fridays. At first, I took the kids out on Fridays before she arrived, but eventually we started sharing meals together with them. One evening, Chrissy asked if she could stay the night. No, I replied with a laugh. The guest room bed isn't that comfortable. You'd better head back to your place, and don't ever expect to be alone with me again. As for Bruce Hartman, his story wasn't entirely true. His wife died after catching him cheating. She sped away in a rage and crashed. Why did he leave town? Let's just say it might have had something to do with a severe beating he took outside a bar, 5 broken ribs, a fractured kneecap, 5 missing teeth, and other injuries. I had to call in a favor with some friends, but it was worth it. That beating ensured he'd never be with another woman again, let alone satisfy one. Over time, Chrissy managed to rebuild a loving relationship with her children, or at least with Sally and Kyle. No matter what Chrissy did, there remained a distance between her and Ron Jr. I thought Sally might hold a grudge, but she was actually the first to fully welcome her mother back. Chrissy also repaired her relationship with her parents, though, like with Ron Jr., her father remained a bit distant. Most Sundays we had dinner together like a family, but we weren't. Chrissy kept apologizing for everything, and finally I told her to stop. "I will never forgive you, so don't even try," I told her. "Oh, please, Chrissy, stop acting childish. I've told you how things are going to be. I don't plan to argue about it anymore. Accept it or don't, that's up to you. We're never getting back together, not even if you were the last woman alive and humanity's future depended on it." I'd still say no. 3 years later, I remarried. I married Sally's teacher. How we met and everything that happened is a story for another time, but what matters is that the kids love her and have accepted her as part of our family. Chrissy still hasn't accepted that I've moved on, but I'm not doing anything to change that. The discussion is over whether she accepts it or not is up to her.